Hello everybody, and welcome to another Future of the Fortress. This is the monthly Q&A that Tarn Adams does on the Bay 12 forums, talking about everything Dwarf Fortress. If you'd like to take part in these discussions, I do link to the threads in the description of these videos. Of course, you will need an account for these forums, and make sure that all of your text is green in the Bay 12 Future of the Fortress thread, so that Tarn knows it's a question for him. But as we always do, we start these discussions off with reading the Bay 12 Games report for the month. September 1st, 2025, Tody writes, "It has been difficult to focus on sieges over the last few months, with the various updates and other things going on. But this month should be a nice, reasonable month to make some real progress. I need to teach them how to overcome bridges and gaps, and I also need to get started on rams, and better death tracking, and path adjustments, and digging. They can already break down walls. From the player side, I need to get all the reinforced wall and siege engine stuff finished. That should mark a first milestone, even though it doesn't have the magic stuff yet. 8,000 sales in August, which is cheerful enough. When Tarn says milestone, I would just like to state that I think that probably means that's when a patch will release. So the way he's wording this, if I'm going to be permitted to speculate here, I would read that as once the new behaviors for the enemies are completed and all of the new toys for the player are implemented, that's when we'll probably see a big patch. And then I would assume, based on that speculation, that we would then see a follow-up patch with the magic stuff connected to temples. But, of course, that's all still down the pipeline, and I'm just guessing here. In reality, I'm just hoping that we see some screenshots or some sprite work of what this stuff's actually going to look like in-game, because that's where a lot of my question marks really are to begin with. It'll be really neat to see reworked catapults, but what exactly are they going to do differently from the player's perspective? Are the boulders just going to follow the enemy now, or are we actually going to have more granular control? I'm just curious. I'm sure we'll see sooner than later. As we dive into the future of the fortress, we start off with our first question from PT Kato, and they say, "With all the new dyes and stuff, are there plans for walls and floor painting? We can somewhat do that already by picking and choosing what material to use and where, but there's not always enough of a given material." And Tarn's response is, "We're slowly leading into this, yeah, as with dyes. We need to go through and collect information for ceramic glazes and paints, and paint methods, and inks. No idea when, but data collection is underway." Another question from PT Kato, and they say, regarding sprites. When you place a wall next to another wall, the sprite changes, and you get a bigger wall instead of two individual walls. Could something like this be done for objects like tables, chairs, or even statues? And Tarn's response is, "It feels a bit more odd to me for the objects. I'd like there to be larger tables, etc., but it feels like it should be a job to get it to happen, unless the dwarves are super into modular furniture." And now a big multi-parter from Disciple of Armok, which begins here, at this place. Are enemy armies subdivided into squads with captains, like the player army? Because at least visually, attackers seem to come in one big chaotic blob. Will this eventual subdivision be the basis for the more tactical enemy sieges in the upcoming siege rework? I also think the last interview with Blind, you described a scenario where the enemy army would attack in waves. First the scouts, and then the combat engineers to clear traps, and then the main fighters. In Tarn's response, he says, "They have kind of a loose squad structure, not quite the same as the dwarves, but in the currently released version, the squad commanders all get the same orders, so it's not apparent. This will change for the siege release, yes." The next question from Disciple of Armok is as follows. "Speaking about combat engineers and pioneers, is this supposed to be a new type of squad, in addition to melee and ranged? Or will these tasks, laying and clearing traps and opening and closing entrances and using war machines, just be done by normal soldiers? Is it planned for cavalry to become its own squad type too, deployable by the player as well?" And Tarn's response is, "I'm still not entirely sure about the operators of siege weapons. There will definitely be more control over them, but I don't know if they'll be in a formal squad or not. There are no plans for dwarven cavalry." And another question from Disciple of Armok, and they say, "I have always wondered how the political simulation and strategy game aspects of Dwarf Fortress work under the hood. Is it like Crusader Kings, where the states are not abstract entities, but decisions are made by ruler NPCs according to their personal knowledge and character traits?" And Tarn quotes DPH Kraken, so I will read their response first, and they say, "There's elements of both. There are abstract entities, the civilizations, and site groups. Historical figures can have positions in them. and thus responsibilities. If I had to guess, the intermediate aristocracy, barons and dukes, is the most crusader kings, like where they exist within the civilization and have a title to the site, but are distinct from the local government. And Tarn, with the most descriptive response as well, adds on with, there are some parts where rulers come into play, and some where it's more abstract. Another question from Disciple of Armok, and they say, right now, the seas and oceans are mostly empty. Is there more plans to fill them? If yes, wouldn't this negatively impact the FPS or game speed if the seas are now also filled with settlements and historical figures? And Tarn's response is, the main issue is that neither forts nor adventurers can really interact with the sea, so there hasn't been much of a point in focusing on it. This will hopefully change over time. Another question from Disciple of Armok, and they say, if I understand correctly, animal species are only placed according to biome at the moment, right? So you can have penguins and polar bears on the same map. Are there plans for more complex simulation of animal spread and distribution? So a world might have, for example, 2 continents where one only has marsupial mammals and the other only has placenta mammals. And Tarn's response is, there's an implication of geological timescales and evolution in the question, which isn't likely to be a thing anytime soon. There might be more reasons why animals are where they are in the future, and stuff like seasonal migration, etc. And another question from Disciple of Armok, and they say, I think I have heard you talking in the past about animal domestication in Dwarf Fortress, like civilizations need to first turn Orarchs into cattle in World Gen. Is this still planned? If yes, would this mechanic also allow other kinds of evolution or magical corruption of species? This is just a citation from yours truly. I may actually have to nickname Disciple of Armok Suggestions of Armok, because this is mostly just suggestions, not questions. Let's continue. Tarn's response is, we've generally talked about domestication in the context of it happening in a fort, and then taking that information properly being sent to the parent civ. So the animals are technically domesticated outside of the fort. It sends some information about domestication levels, but it doesn't yet take the final step civ-wide. Other weird magical shenanigans would be related to however that technically works, yeah? And Disciple of Armok continues, and they say, I was wondering if there are any specific inspirations for the world of Dwarf Fortress. You have talked about roguelikes influencing the gameplay of Dwarf Fortress, but what about the content and the lore? Knowing that much of the current lore is just placeholder for what will eventually mostly be procedural generation. I have always had the impression that there was a lot of the Little Hobbit in there, with the dwarves trying to reclaim their old homes that have been destroyed by monsters, while fighting evil goblins and naughty elves, and also just the general whimsical vibe of Dwarf Fortress. And Toady responds with, yeah, the token stuff obviously enters into it, and the subsequent media from that line. We've oddly not yet grown our fighting equipment much beyond the basic old D&D and early RPG setup, and many other books and movies and folklore that were floating around from childhood up through the game's development. Some specifically, and a lot just through the churn of it all in bits and pieces. And a question comes in from Eric Blank, and they said, you stated pickaxe material versus wall material might matter for invaders. Ability to break down walls and bridges. Are you thinking, like steel walls should be impenetrable to anything softer, or just take longer to work through? Maybe a gradient where something like iron and bronze can work its way through, eventually consuming multiple pickaxes, but copper cannot. Tarn's response is, yeah, I'm on the fence and just need to playtest through this one at this point. If steel is invincible to civs without steel, it might trivialize the game. And Eric asks another question. Do you intend to extend this to our own deconstruction of our previously built walls, so it takes our miners longer to deconstruct them? And Tarn's response is, probably not, just on a pure annoying for the player basis. Thank you, Tarn. Another question from Eric Blank, I think this is one of 3, and they say, will this apply to minerals when I want to dig? Will I need steel picks to break raw adamantine? Of course, most of the minerals would need to have their specific properties defined to matter then. And Tarn's response is, yeah, it would be nice, but it's not a super high priority for the sieges. And a question comes in from 610, and they say, is native max silicon support just off the table now? Or, we'll get to it someday? I just love the game so much and I want to play it at work. And Tarn's response is, the Kitfox statement there still applies. It's a technical burden that we've currently traded for things like Lua, etc. And in the future, we'll keep weighing it. The next question comes in from Haifong, and they say, I would like to know your vision for intelligent wildlife interactivity in fort mode gameplay. If you could somehow quickly and easily program intelligent wildlife to behave in your ideal manner, how would it look? This ranges from roaming wild animal people to Gorlaks, plump helmet men, etc., perhaps even trolls, and blind cave ogres. For example, if a wandering Gorlak might stop by to share his wisdom over some dwarven wine, or one out of a herd of tapirmen might decide to split off from the group and seek out civilized life in your fortress, similar to what happens in World Gen. These are things I think about, or perhaps you feel that they are just about where they should be. Thanks for the answer, if you do so. And Tarn's response is, yeah, certainly we'd like their intelligence status to be respected, and for thought strings that dwarves have about them to be meaningful. We'd also like all the World Gen activities to be respected in all modes. That, of course, is a lot of work, and hasn't happened. But, yeah, ideally, they'd be treated properly. A question from a curious cat, and they say, are you being affected by, or do you expect to be affected by, what is happening with Steam and PayPal, as well as with Steam and MasterCard and Visa? And what, if any, steps are you taking or plan to take? And Tarn's response is, it's hard to tell if there's been a direct impact. Numbers have been slightly lower on a day-to-day basis, but I don't know if it's related at all. A question comes in from Nintenlord, and they say, is stockpile and trade, or the screen and depot rework or UI improvements possible in the near future? Or are they waiting to be scrapped in their current form when a new feature replaces them? And Tarn's response is, there isn't a near-term plan for a change on a pure UX basis. There are some feature changes we're thinking about roughly in the Siege area that would have an impact if we got to the market and fair stuff, type interactions with the outside neighbors. And that might not happen at the first update, but it's a place that we're headed. Question comes in from Eric Blank, and they say, will the Siege AI be active for prisoners kept in the fortress as well? As in, if I throw a captured goblin, sappers, and mechanics in a dungeon, will they be able to attempt to orchestrate an escape, breaking walls and bridges, or picking locks on doors? A breakout planned simultaneously with the new Siege would be fun, and a fun scenario to play out. And I think I had this question while I was once again building an arena for disposing of said prisoners. And Tarn's response is, it's not something that comes for free with their previous invasion plans, but it could be done once we change how cages work generally, since some of the same stuff would apply. A question comes in from Stained Class, and they say, in older versions, digged caves could cave in, because of the mountain's weight, if they were too large. Since Z-levels were introduced, this was removed entirely, and now a player can build bridges with no support at all for dozens and dozens of tiles, and it wouldn't even need to be connected to something on the other end to not collapse. And very large rooms never collapse, so no matter how deep they are or what mass of rock wall blocks are above, will cave-ins or more realistic restrictive requirements for supports be re-implemented in the future? And Tarn's response is, it's a technical problem of deciding when cave-ins should actually occur, considering the 3D space that's non-trivial compared to the 7x7 rule from the two-dimensional version. And it's also an interface problem of communicating when a 3D cave-ins might occur to the player, which was also easy with the 7x7 rule from 3D. So it's on the back burner, and I'd be happy to have them come back, but both these problems need to be overcome. And a question from the Marmot, and they say, have you considered to add more creatures to Dwarf Fortress before the procedural creature generator appears? Is the ASCII graphics and UI going to be eventually customizable, or upgraded into something more fitting for ASCII? If I recall correctly, you mentioned that the Lua mods would allow for customization of the UI, and I might be mixing things up though. After you finish with everything listed on the development page as possible soon to be updates, what can we expect for the next editions? Is the summer in the UK that bad, or is it tolerable enough? And Tarn's responses are, sometimes we think about adding more vanilla creatures, and sometimes we think about improving and differentiating the ones that we already have. We also think about procedural creatures, of course. I don't know among these three which will be the next to get attention. With the underground map rewrite and the existing subterranean creatures, Gorlaks and underground civilizations, etc., we'll certainly be getting updates, but there could be new vanilla procedural creatures then as well. We haven't gotten the Lua to that point yet. As the Lua interface gets set up, the ASCII stuff should be modifiable, and it's all the same stuff. We're not announcing things that far in advance, since we need to remain flexible. The temperatures have been more mild than they were in Washington, and it rains more, so I've found it nice. A question comes in from the Flame52, and they say, I recently noticed that we can no longer stab a foe, the weapon lodging firmly in the wound, and then drop the weapon, leaving them impaled. This seems like a deliberate change. Is there any particular reason? And Tarn's response is, nah, that sounds like a bug. There should still be stabs there, and there still should be lodging, and lodged weapons should still be droppable, while maintaining the inventory item in the victim. A question comes in from DPH Kraken, and they say, are there plans to handle receiving caravans from different civilizations, such as different dwarven kingdoms, making it more granular and dynamic? And Tarn's response is, yeah, we have lots of plans, notoriously shelved in 2007, but now feeling the pressure of a comeback, now that we're trying to make sieges more painful. The main aspects are making better trade agreements with the main goal and regional civilizations and groups, and also having a more free-form interaction with all of your surrounding pendants. More of a market-type feeling that might involve setting up many specialist depots, etc. A question comes in from Stained Class, and they say, since they are the only intelligent vermins, is there plan to add possible interactions for fairies and pixies, for them to be more than glorified normal vermin? Are mysterious dungeons, all being visible on the map, the intended behavior? Or may they become hidden until they are found, just like caves and megabeast shrines? I'm happy that the Meanderer tag no longer applies to animal people by default. Is something similar planned for hunting or war-trained animals? And Tarn's response is, we have a whole thing for fairy-type stuff, so in the myth and magic framework, we'll see changes over time in that area. It's intended for now, while this stubby tutorial chosen feature is in. It would be nice, certainly silly, for the trained creatures to pretend they are living the chill grazer life. Question comes in from, Shepinator? Shepherd. Right now, zones can only be designated on one Z level. This means it's not possible to make grand halls with multiple levels and balconies, etc. at all. One continuous zone, and additionally, pastures can be a pain if you embark on terrain with a lot of elevation changes. Is there a technical reason why zones are restricted this way? Or would it be possible to change it? It would be cool if multi-Z level zones could also have benefits, such as a hall with a towering ceiling contributing to its value, or maybe even being required for royal rooms. And Tarn's response is, it's a technical reason, but not an incredibly strong one. It's just convenient storage-wise to have one occupancy grid in memory, but it wouldn't be prohibitive to have more. We'd put a band-aid on this by having the locations like inns and hospitals, etc., that refer to zones over multiple Z levels. It's not clear which way we'll go to solve this problem. It may be that zones occupy one Z level, but there are just more kinds of locations. Or it could be that it's hidden in the interface, but still using zones as they are. Or zones could be changed in any case. We'd like to respect larger rooms, yeah, and the current setup has just created a little inertia. A question comes in from Stained Class, and they say, I hope I'm not too late to ask this one. May children's strange moods be a bit reworked, since they generally have no experience in mutable skills, and they become legendary in minor skills, like Bone Carver, and they are now an adult at 18, so it happens more often. And Tarn's response is, it's a reasonable thing to do. I'm not generally sure the strange mood situation will be as myth and magic features slowly approach. It's a very specific thing which will develop more and more tension with what's coming. Like most vanilla things, we want it preserved for a certain default setting, but I'm not sure what will happen more broadly, and what sorts of tweaks will happen at the base level. Thank you very much for listening to this month's Future of the Fortress. As always, there was a couple questions that I cut due to time, and also a few things have been reworded for my readability's sake. If you'd like to see more videos like this, I've been running these Future of the Fortress read-alongs for several years now, but I also do other Dwarf Fortress coverage. For those of you waiting on the big story videos, I have one in the pipeline. It should be out sometime in September. Thank you very much for waiting, frankly, because it's been a long time coming. I also have a few other ideas for formats that I'd like to experiment with, and things that I'd like to do on this channel. So, keep an eye out for those as well. Of course, most of them will be dwarf-related, but some things may not be. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.